How strong is China's power in 2025? This is a question the whole world cares about now. Back in 2015, countries around the world generally believed that China's military strength could only rank third in the world, with a large gap compared to the US and Russia. After 2022, some in the West began to believe that China was in fact the world's true second military power. But after entering 2024, everyone around the world began to experience a collapse of their old perceptions, because China's strength went far beyond their imagination. First, on June 2nd, Chang'e 6 landed on the far side of the moon at the South Pole Aitken Basin. The Americans urgently appealed, saying not to erase traces of America's moon landing. Then in July, China first sent out a Type 055 destroyer to patrol near Alaska in the US. And then, China's immigration authority announced that at 37 ports, they would implement a 144-hour visa-free entry policy for foreigners. In August, China's AAA video game blockbuster Black Myth: Wukong came out of nowhere, breaking multiple records in world gaming history. At the end of September, China's Dongfeng Express accurately hit its predetermined target in the Pacific. The whole world fell completely silent. The Americans hurriedly said this was a good thing. In October, China announced it would launch an extraterrestrial life exploration program. In November, at the Zhuhai Air Show, China unveiled simultaneously over a dozen types of high-tech equipment. China's unmanned intelligent technology subverted everyone's understanding. Drones and robot dogs will change the nature of battlefields worldwide. On December 26th, Chairman Mao's birthday, China unveiled two sixth-generation fighter jets at once, frightening the US Pentagon into urgently discussing countermeasures. When these facts are laid before everyone, the whole world can see clearly that the global situation has already changed. A tremendous upheaval of change. The US, once the world's hegemon, is now behind China by a whole generation in terms of main fighter aircraft. In terms of main destroyers, China's Type 055 is also number one in the world. In the comparison of rocket forces on land, the PLA is still stronger than the US Army. At the current trend, I estimate it won't take long before the US completely loses the ability to dominate the world. But there are still some who doubt China's strength, because they believe the PLA hasn't fought a war for decades. And no matter how good the equipment is, it may not show its power. Do their doubts make sense? They make a lot of sense. After all, actual combat is the only standard for testing truth. The PLA has not fought a war for decades, while the US military fights wars every day. If an emergency really occurs, it is indeed possible that some unpredictable factors may arise. Just as everyone was thinking about this question, on January 7th, an event occurred that tested the war mobilization capabilities of China and the US. On January 7th, in Dingri County, Tibet, a 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck. Global media focused on it. Everyone wanted to see what today's China was really capable of when facing an emergency situation. Then, under everyone's attention, the Chinese once again proved their war mobilization capability and emergency responsibility were still unmatched in the world. Just 10 minutes after the earthquake occurred, Chinese drones appeared over the disaster area. Within 15 minutes, Chinese troops and police arrived in the quake zone to rescue civilians. In 30 minutes, Dingri County had already organized demolition and rescue operations. In 5 hours, China's Y-20 transport aircraft carried rescue supplies and soldiers to the front line. In 6 hours, power was restored in the quake area. In 10 hours, communications in the quake area were restored. That very night, the people in the quake zone were already eating 4 dishes and 1 soup. Students in the quake zone had already started doing homework. In just a few hours, life in the quake zone had returned to calm. By the time people woke up early the next morning, the roads in the disaster zone had already been repaired. Relief supplies from across the country began to pour continuously into the disaster area. This Chinese rescue operation came to a staged conclusion. On that same January 7th, in Los Angeles, the second largest U.S. city, a wildfire disaster broke out and engulfed the city. A large number of American homes were reduced to ashes. Countless people were forced to flee in panic. In such a life-or-death moment, what were Americans doing? Their governor was complaining the president wouldn't answer the phone. Their firefighters had no water to use, so they could only scoop water from the ground with traffic cones to fight fires. Some even carried water in tote bags to extinguish flames. In the end, the fire spread and completely spiraled out of control. After the incident, some media outlets evaluated the performance of China and the US in facing disasters. They said, China, at an altitude of 4,300 meters, took only 30 hours to mobilize an army of more than 20,000 people, supplying survival needs for 60,000 people. But the US, in one of its core cities, could not put out a natural disaster due to a lack of water. Throughout the whole process, one could not see at all the US as a nation having any emergency response capability. If war really broke out between the two countries, the consequences would be simply unimaginable. Do you understand now? This is how China and the US today differ in their responses to emergencies. Many people's thinking is still stuck in decades past. They believe the gap between China and the US is still unimaginably large. Some even judge national strength only by looking at GDP figures. But those who truly understand know clearly that the comparison of warfighting strength between nations. What really matters in comparison is industrial production capacity, the ability to distribute supplies, and power generation, as well as steel output and other core data. And in these data, China is now comprehensively ahead of the Americans. Take industrial production capacity, for example. According to statistics, in 2024, China's industrial capacity accounted for 35% of the world's share. And the growth rate is still continuing. It is expected that by around 2035, this figure could reach 45%. By then, even if the US and Europe join forces, they won't be our match. As for power generation data, we are also far ahead. With the further advancement of the new energy revolution and the construction of the Medog hydropower station, China's future power generation figures will climb even higher. As for steel capacity, there's no need to even mention it. One Hebei province alone is unmatched in the world. The steel output of just Tangshan can overwhelm that of a major world power. If a real war broke out, these abilities above are China's greatest confidence. As for America's inflated GDP, it may look frightening in peacetime, but when it truly comes to an emergency, is the US going to use Wall Street's financial capital to fight enemies? Or charge into battle with tens of trillions from the US stock market? Even US Secretary of State Blinken sees this very clearly. On January 4th, in an interview with the New York Times, he said the US cannot defeat China alone. China is simply too powerful. Never has there been a country with such strength as China. You see, even the US leadership has already admitted China's strength. But within the country, many still lack confidence. They firmly believe the US is invincible. They refuse to believe their own motherland is about to stand at the top of the world. But regardless of whether they admit it or not, objective facts will not change because of their subjective views.